G'day, it's Jeff here. Today I'm going to do an image review where I take one of my photos, look at the pros and cons of it and explain what I think is good and bad and why. So today the image we've got here is a living room shot from a recent job for a local real estate agent. And first of all I'm going to start off with just a bit of a background of the property and the image and why it was shot the way it was shot. So firstly we've got a renovated property which is currently unoccupied, so there's no furniture. And this living room is the sole living room in the house. Now it's an older cottage, approximately 80 years old, something like that, with very high ceilings, which are 3 meters or 10 feet, and very ornate ceiling patterns, as you can see in the photo. And it was important to get those details in. It's important to get this light in because it was a combination light fan, and really there's not a lot else in the room that dictates the height of the camera because there's no furniture I need to get above. So really the height was dictated by the height of the ceiling. So I had my camera probably about chest height for a room like this, which is not very common. I don't often get rooms or houses for that matter with ceilings so high. Now this particular shot was also dictated by the real estate agent. Now some real estate agents are quite easy and let me do whatever I like, and other real estate agents I work for like to pick and choose angles, sometimes even moving the camera small amounts, and this particular agent is quite particular about what they like. So they wanted me to set up exactly at this point where I am here, which is in a doorway between this living room and the kitchen, which is behind the camera. And they wanted to see not only the room itself, but they also wanted to see down the hallway and through to the outside. And if I grab my lasso tool, and I'll do that. So this particular spot here, they wanted to see right through and all the way down to this outside area here where you can see a table and chair set up. Like it's just basically a little courtyard. So they wanted to see that and the room all in one photo. So that basically dictated how I was going to expose for the different rooms and hallway, etc. So first of all, I had to determine a base exposure. Now my base exposure is this shot here. Now this is f8, 1/10 of a second at ISO 100. Now I chose this exposure because I wanted to see through here, but I didn't want this to get too dark. So I didn't want this area out here to be too dark and unrealistic. And it's probably a good combination between not too bright and not too dark. You can see the table and the items on the table are overexposed. That's fine, it's only a small thing in the frame. But the fence itself is not too dark. I didn't want the fence to go any darker, it would have looked unnatural. And also we have this window over here, which really wasn't important. There was no view out the window, and it wasn't important. The only importance of this window was not to overexpose it and blow it out too much. And I think that was a nice compromise. That was fine right there. So again, this is the base exposure. This is the first shot I took to make sure I was happy with the exposure outside through the window. Once I determined this was a good exposure, I fired up the AD200 flash, and the next exposure we shot lighting up the living room itself, which is this shot here. So the AD200 flash is set, it's either 1:1 or maybe slightly less, maybe it's like 0.3 or 0.6 below full power. But either way, the AD200 did a really good job lighting up this room. Straight away I knew this was a really good exposure to use for the room itself. So the next step was to start lighting this hallway up. Now this is the importance of carrying multiple flash units when you're on a job. I always carry my AD200 as well as a pair of V862 flashes. So all three of those work off the same remote triggering system, and that way I can use my AD200 as my primary flash where the camera is, where I'm set up at the camera. And I can take one of my two speed lights or both of them, and I can put them on stands or anything I want for that matter, and I can light up hallways and other rooms as I need to get all the exposure done in one shot. Now this is probably a good example of this, and it's a good probably point to stop and talk about the importance of sometimes getting as much as you can done in camera and not relying as heavily on post-production. So This essentially, all up, these series of exposures probably took me about 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes tops, if I count walking into the hallway to put my flashes in, etc. And to do this in post-production, take a series of photos and try and blend them and cut and do selections and things like that to bring different parts, like for instance to bring the hallway in over here with a brighter exposure and to cut, to do a selection around this door, that's going to take you a bit of time in Photoshop, probably about 10 minutes, maybe even 15 minutes if you do a really good job of it. So doing all this on site and getting the exposure as good as you can in camera just saves you so much time, and it's probably saved me about 10, maybe even 15 minutes of my day in the end. So the next step, once I had this exposure, I was happy with the flash here. Next step was to take a flash and put it in this hallway. Now there's a little alcove here you can't see, and around the corner where there is another bedroom and a bathroom and a cupboard, I took one of my V862s, full power, stuck it on a light stand in this corner, came back and shot another exposure, and that's what we got there, which is really nice. Now I had the flash on the light stand as high as I possibly get. I didn't want any light spill. Sometimes if you have it too low, you get a bit of light spill, which will come through this doorway here, and you'll get like a big blown out section on the wall or ceiling up here. I was trying to avoid that, and being really high ceilings and high doorways, it's actually quite hard to get it as high as I could, but this worked well. Now you can see the little bit of light spill around the door jamb there, but I actually quite like it. It doesn't, in my mind, detract from the image. It actually makes it look quite nice. So that was now we're in the third shot now. So I was happy with that immediately. So I literally got that within the first exposure, shooting with the extra flash. So, and the agent actually looked at this shot at this point here and said, "Oh, that's beautiful. I love it. That's really good." And I said, "No, I just want to do one more thing." She says, "Why? What's wrong with it?" And I said, "Well, I'm not 100% happy with the lighting down here at the end of the hallway. There's a little room at the front here, like a little sunroom." So I took a second V862 flash, took it up this hallway, around the corner, sat it on the floor on its little plastic stand, full power, pointing up and kind of away from this door, so I didn't get any bad light spill, especially through this doorway here. Also, I think I used the little, the little white cards that are inside the flash. When you pull the diffuser panel out, you had that little white card. And also, both flashes had the diffuser panel on as well. So, set that flash up, came back to the camera, picked up my AD200, fired the next shot. And that's the next shot there. Now you can see that's obvious there's a flash that's gone off in this room. You can see the really bright light here. But I really love the way it highlighted the timber work, the timber paneling in this front room, and really brought the color out. As you can see in the previous shot, you've really lost it there. It's just all muddy and dark, and that's kind of brought up as well. Another little thing you'll notice here is, if you notice this doorway, I actually bumped the door as I walked past. So it moved a little bit, but that was fine. Didn't matter because there's going to be no blending. Seeing as I was able to get all of these in one exposure, there was no blending. So took this shot, showed the agent, and she was over the moon. She was really happy with it. Beautiful shot. And that was it. Done. So the only other thing I did to this shot when I got back to my office in post-production was just adjust the contrast and the color a tiny little bit. And that was basically all. Probably about another minute's work in Photoshop. All the work was done on site. It literally only took about 3 minutes. Now you can tell, like I can tell obviously as a photographer, I can tell looking at this that there's been flashes used here and here. I can tell that. But for me, this is a beautiful way of lighting a main room and also showing detail through hallways and things like that, especially when they're not really lit well, or where it's important and you need to see through, or the agents ask you if you can show up another room through, if you can get the view right through like a pair of rooms or a hallway or whatever. So now the question is, could you get this or something close to this with one shot without using flash? So I thought about it afterwards. I thought, I wonder if I could. So I took one of my ambient exposures, because I always shoot ambient exposures like this of the room. I shot a couple of brighter ones and this one as well. I always shoot a couple of ambient exposures of every single room that I shoot, every single angle that I shoot. Always, it's good insurance, and also I often blend them back into the flash shots to take a bit of the edge off the flash itself, so rooms don't look overly flashed, to be honest. So, and it also helps, you can bring back in subtle things like the lighting on floors and things, the place where the light actually hits ceilings. You can bring that back in if it adds to the photo, and more often than not it actually does add to the photo. This particular shot, No, it didn't. Really didn't. And also, you know, the work that I do for this particular agent, this is the kind of work I put out for them. And the pricing, the way I priced my work for this agent determines that I do a quick, clean, high quality job with minimal post-production. So I'm always looking at ways, when I work for this agent, I'm always looking for ways that I can get as much done in camera as I can. Now, back to the experiment with the ambient room exposure. So I took the ambient room exposure and I spent about 15 or 20 minutes in camera raw, just working with it, brightening, highlights down, shadows up, contrast, fixing contrast, moving the white black point, etc., etc. Also added several local adjustments from the radial filters. So I put radial filters in the door and different parts of the room to try and even out the exposure. And this is the result I got here. So that is literally an ambient room shot where I've taken, for instance, I've put a radial exposure over this side to darken it down, you know, over here. And then on this side over here, I put a radial exposure to brighten it up. Then I've put separate radial filters, sorry, in the hall here, brighten it up, etc., etc. And if we can compare the two, this is a pure ambient shot where I've just done a little bit of work. Well, actually done a lot of work, spent a lot of time, and this took me 3 or 4 times longer than the other shot. And this is a shot. Oh, where am I going? This is a shot with flash. That's the ambient. So that's about 15-20 minutes at least to get it right. And you can see the contrast is a lot heavier. The colors are more punchier because, you know, we're pushing contrast, we're pushing the luminosity, we're really stretching the image to try and get the most out of it. Whereas this one here, it's just a natural, more cleaner image, all shot in camera with flash and minimal time spent on it. So yeah, the pros of this image, obviously time saved. Get it in camera as much as you can. Can't encourage you enough to get it as much in camera as you can when you're shooting real estate. If you don't use flash and you're going to have to work like this, then you're going to be spending a lot more time in post-production and you're going to have a lot more issues with contrast and things like that. And it's really hard using radial filters because they're oval. I wish Adobe would make a filter based on the distort tool. So you can actually take a square and distort it into any shape you want and use that with a feather. That would be amazing. But no, they have round, which doesn't always work on squared always. And they have square, which doesn't always work, where, for instance, if you pull a gradient over the top of a house, you end up darkening some of the roof, and that looks a bit weird. So there we have it. So I hope you enjoyed this little look today at an image I shot recently, how I put it together, and why I did it the way I did. If you have any questions, please put them in the comment section below. I'm happy to answer questions as much as I can. And hope to actually start this as a series. I wouldn't mind going through a lot of my different images and talking about how they're put together, how I do them, and also my thought processes when I'm on site shooting real estate. I know a lot of people have asked questions like that as far as how I post-process and how I go about shooting things on site. So yeah, I hope this helps, and I look forward to doing another one soon, and I'll see you again next time.